Back in the 14th century, Singapore was just a humble fishing village. Fast forward to the 19th century, and an adventurous British sailor named Sir Thomas Stamford Raffles saw potential in this little spot. He decided to buy it from the Sultan of Johor on behalf of the East India Company. Why? Well, Raffles had grand ideas. He wanted a shortcut to China and also wanted to give the Dutch a run for their money in the region. Then came the chaos of the Second World War in 1942. Japanese forces swooped in and took over Singapore, even giving it a new name, Shinonan, which meant Southern Light. But as history has it, the British managed to wrestle it back from their grasp on the 6th of September in 1945. Jumping forward to 1946, Singapore officially became a British colony, distinct from places like Penang and Malacca. The years that followed were far from smooth. By 1959, though, Britain acknowledged Singapore's self-governing aspirations within the Commonwealth. Then, a big leap to 1963. Singapore finally gained its full independence. It even joined forces with the Malay Federation at first, but that didn't last long. A couple of years down the road, differences with the federal government led Singapore to say, hey, we're going it alone. And so it did, stepping onto the world stage as a sovereign state. And now it's not just any state. It's often called the Asian Tiger. Quite the journey, huh? Fast forward 2 years to 1965, and Singapore decides to do a little solo act, bidding adieu to the Federation of Malaysia. Now, the reason behind this breakup was no romantic drama. It was all about some serious ideological clashes between the People's Action Party, PAP, the big shots in Singapore's government, and the higher-ups in Kuala Lumpur. Mark the date, August 9, 1965. That's when Singapore officially declared, we're our own boss now. Yusof bin Ishak took the oath as the very first president, while Lee Kuan Yew held on to the prime minister's seat. But hey, with independence came a bit of a gloomy economic outlook. Picture 1989. Breaking up with Malaysia meant saying goodbye to a chunk of Singapore's economic hub. And to make things more interesting, Indonesia was causing a bit of a ruckus, playing the military confrontation card with both Singapore and Malaysia. That move kind of dried up the trade route from that direction. Oh, and let's not forget, Britain decided to pack its bags and move out of Singapore's bases in 1968, taking a good chunk of jobs with it. Ouch. Now, if you look around Singapore today, you'll see towering buildings, a rat race of development, and economic growth that's as lush as the city's greenery. It's like a potpourri of promise, bustling with businesses, markets, and trade opportunities. But the real magic here is more than meets the eye. You see, Singapore isn't just about the concrete and the commerce. It's a symphony of cultures: Chinese, Malay, Indian, and a sprinkle of everything else. This blend of cultural heritage is what truly defines Singapore, a place where diverse traditions dance together. Meet Lee Kuan Yew, the visionary who took the pint-sized outpost of Singapore and turned it into one of Asia's most prosperous and refreshingly clean countries. He wasn't just a leader, he was the founding father and the very first prime minister. Lee Kuan Yew started his prime ministerial journey in 1959, right when Singapore shook off British oversight and gained full self-governance. He held the reins until 1990, when he decided to pass them on. But even in his later years, he was the big personality and the engine that kept chugging in what he proudly labeled a first world oasis amidst a sea of third world challenges. In a candid chat with the New York Times back in 2007, Mr. Lee laid out what had practically become Singapore's motto. Does it work? If it does, let's roll with it. If it's still good, let's keep at it. If it flops, well, toss it aside and give something else a shot. His leadership style raised some eyebrows for its tight grip on freedom, but guess what? That recipe actually did the trick. Singapore transformed into this globally respected hub for business and finance that everyone admired. Lee Kuan Yew was a real maestro of what he called Asian values. In his book, Society's Well-Being ranked higher than individual rights, and folks willingly traded in a slice of their independence in exchange for a bit of paternalistic governance. It was his secret sauce, and it sure did whip up something remarkable in Singapore's pot. Lee Kuan Yew wasn't one to fade into the background when it came to the country's politics. According to none other than Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong himself, his dad had quite the influence lingering around. Yep, even in his later years, he had this eagle-eyed focus on Singapore. I mean, it was more than just a place to him. It was like his all-consuming love affair. His son put it best, saying he poured his heart and soul into Singapore, no holding back. Toward the end of his journey, he summed it up like this: I've invested so much of my life into crafting this nation. What's left for me to achieve? Well, it's a flourishing Singapore. And what have I let go of? Oh, just my entire life. Lee Kuan Yew's reign at the helm, stretching over 3 decades from June 5, 1959 to November 28, 1990, was like a roller coaster ride of change that transformed Singapore Singapore into this rock-solid and prosperous gem of Asia. Lee had this master plan, and it had 5 secret ingredients for cooking up a successful nation. First, you needed stability, then you stirred in some education, sprinkled in investment, jazzed up the living standards, and topped it all off with a pinch of security. And guess what? His government pretty much nailed it in every single one of these departments. Now rewind to the 1950s and early 1960s. Singapore was like a scene out of a movie, complete with constant protests, strikes, and riots that could get pretty deadly. It was a wild time, what with this newfound independence and everyone being unsure about what's next. But you know how it goes. Sometimes when things get tough, folks are more open to rolling up their sleeves and making sacrifices for the greater good. Those rowdy student groups and labor unions causing all the ruckus? Lee was like, hold on a minute, we need some order up in here, and he didn't hesitate to tighten up the security screws. He even took on the communists in some intense battles, making sure they didn't gain the upper hand like they did in other freshly liberated countries. Lee wasn't just about controlling the chaos though, he was all about education being the golden ticket to success. He basically revamped the school curriculum to spread some shared values and ideas. Education, according to him, was the secret sauce to making people soar higher on the social ladder. With money flowing in and prosperity rising, folks started aiming for fancier living standards, out with the old slums, in with the sleek high-rise housing. The government even gave a little nudge for people to own their own homes, thinking that would make them feel more attached to their nation. They pumped up the Central Provident Fund to help folks save up not only for houses, but also for healthcare. Lee was like, nope, we're not going all out on Western-style welfare here. He believed in personal responsibility and didn't want people relying too much on the government's safety net. Oh, and the environment? Lee was determined not to let Singapore turn into a concrete jungle like Hong Kong. He was all about keeping the place green and clean. Trees were popping up left and right, natural spots were preserved, and he even took charge of cleaning up the Kaling Basin and the Singapore River. Those fines for bad behavior might have raised a few eyebrows internationally, but hey, they sure did keep the place spick and span. It was a bit like back in the day during the Japanese occupation. Fear of punishment kept things in line even during tough times. So there you have it, Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore saga, a mix of tough choices, big ideas, and a good dose of foresight. It's like a recipe for success, with a dash of discipline and a sprinkle of green goodness. As the world becomes more and more tech-savvy, countries are in a race to establish themselves as global technology hotspots. Singapore, for one, is eagerly throwing its hat in the ring. You know, Silicon Valley didn't just pop up overnight. It took a solid half-century to shape it into the tech behemoth it is today. Well, guess what? Singapore has been on a mission, and it's been making some pretty impressive strides. In fact, it's outpaced even the mighty Silicon Valley, snagging the title of the world's numero uno when it comes to startup talent. And hey, when you've got heavyweights like Google, Facebook, and LinkedIn making a home here, you know you're onto something big. Singapore isn't just a regional player, it's churning out startups left and right in Southeast Asia. Oh, and did you hear the news? Alibaba Group, that tech giant from China, is planting one of its global research and development centers right here in Singapore. Talk about rubbing shoulders with the big dogs. So why is Singapore scoring all these wins? Well, it's got a bunch of aces up its sleeve. The government's backing these tech dreams with cold hard cash, the infrastructure is getting a boost, and the talent pool flowing deep. All these factors have come together in a techie harmony, pushing our ecosystem to new heights. But hold up, the winds of change are stirring in the tech universe. The Chinese players like Alibaba Group and Tencent Holdings are joining the exclusive multi-billion tech club, which used to be reserved just for the American heavyweights. Now, don't get me wrong, the US still holds the crown as the go-to playground for tech companies and startups, and it's going to keep that crown for a while. Over in Asia, there's no stock exchange that's quite nailed down the tech IPO game. Talking numbers, the tech and telecom scene is flexing some major muscles on the SGX, boasting nearly 80 companies and a combined market cap of a whopping $62 billion. So buckle up, because it looks like we're on a wild ride in the world of tech, and Singapore is claiming its spot in the front row. The government's game plan wouldn't have been half as effective without a strong dose of tech magic. Singapore went all in on the tech front, building a digital backbone that's powering its ambitious Smart Nation mission.